There are moments in life when everything feels like it pauses, even though the world around you keeps moving, keeps making noise, keeps going forward without waiting. And in those moments, something shifts inside you, something quiet but impossible to ignore. For years, his voice filled that world in a way few voices ever do. It carried warmth, memory, and something deeply familiar, almost like a feeling you've known your entire life but could never fully explain. It wasn't just music people listened to in passing, it was music people lived with. Songs that stayed through decades, through love and heartbreak, through quiet nights when nothing made sense and loud celebrations when everything felt right. And beside that voice quietly, consistently, there was someone else, not standing in the spotlight, not chasing attention or recognition, just there, steady, present, real. A constant behind the scenes, then slowly something began to change. Not in a way that made headlines overnight, not with a single moment people could point to and say, this is where everything shifted. It came quietly, almost gently at first. The kind of change you feel before you can explain it. The kind that replaces certainty with questions, little by little. Fans began to notice it in small, almost unspoken ways. A pause that lingered just a little longer than before. A moment that felt slightly heavier. A tone, subtle but different, carrying something deeper beneath it. And at the center of it all, there was a moment no one was ready for. An emotional goodbye. Not just from a stage, not just from the music people had held onto for so long. But something more personal. Something that reached beyond performance and into real life. And the more people tried to understand it, the more one question stayed quietly underneath everything. Was this the end of something they had always believed would never change, or the beginning of a reality they were never prepared to face? For decades, Neil Diamond was never just a performer in the traditional sense. He became something deeper, something more personal to people who followed his journey. His voice wasn't tied to one era or one moment. It stretched across time, across generations, connecting people in ways that felt almost intimate. There was something steady about him. Something that didn't feel temporary. His songs carried a rare balance. They could fill massive arenas, echoing through thousands of voices, yet somehow still feel like they were meant for one person sitting alone, listening quietly. That kind of connection doesn't happen by accident, it comes from something real. But behind that steady, familiar presence, there was a life that most people never truly saw. A private world that existed away from the stage, away from the lights, away from the expectations. A life built on quieter moments, on connection that didn't need an audience. His relationship with Katie McNeil became one of those grounding parts of his life. It wasn't shaped by public attention or defined by what people expected to see. It was something real, something steady, something that existed even when everything else was changing. Over time, that relationship became more than just a part of his life. It became a foundation. Because behind every performance, behind every song people hold onto, there is always a human story that carries it. And sometimes those stories begin to change in ways that can't stay hidden forever. Fame has a way of creating distance. People see the performance, the strength, the consistency. They see what continues, but they don't always see what shifts quietly underneath. The quiet struggles, the emotional weight that doesn't show on stage, the changes that don't announce themselves. And slowly, those unseen moments began to shape a different kind of story. A story that wasn't only about music anymore, but about something far more personal. For a long time, everything looked steady, almost untouched by time. His career had already reached a place most artists spend their lives trying to reach. The recognition was there, the legacy was already built, and the connection with fans never really faded. There was no pressure to prove anything new, no urgency pushing him forward. It felt like a moment where everything had settled, and in that stillness, his personal life seemed grounded too. His relationship with Katie existed in a completely different space than his public life. It was quieter, more private, built on everyday moments that didn't need to be seen to matter. That kind of balance is rare, especially for someone who has spent so much of their life being seen by the world. There was a sense that he had found something that allowed him to step outside of that constant spotlight. A space where he didn't have to perform, didn't have to meet expectations, didn't have to be anything other than himself. And that kind of space matters more than people often realize. Because when someone lives in the spotlight for so long, the ability to step away from it becomes just as important as standing in it. For a while, that balance held, performances continued. Appearances remained, the connection with the audience stayed strong, unchanged on the surface, nothing seemed out of place. But stability, even when it feels solid, can be more fragile than it looks. Sometimes the biggest changes don't begin with something obvious. They begin quietly, in small, almost invisible moments. Moments that don't seem important at first but slowly begin to add up. And that's exactly how this story started to shift. The first signs didn't come with noise or clarity. They didn't arrive with a clear explanation or a moment that made everything suddenly make sense. They came in pieces, a slight change in energy, a pause that felt different, moments where things didn't flow the way they once did. According to reports, Parkinson's disease began to play a role in that shift. Not in a way that was immediately visible to everyone, but in a way that slowly, quietly began to affect the rhythm of his life. And when something like that enters your life, it doesn't just stay physical. It changes how you move through your day, how you think about tomorrow, how you imagine what comes next. It changes certainty. For someone whose life had been built around performance, connection, and consistency, that kind of change doesn't remain in the background. It begins to shape decisions. And for those closest to him, especially Katie, it becomes something deeply personal. Because it's not just about seeing change. It's about living through it together. Moments that once felt simple begin to feel heavier, more meaningful. Time starts to feel different. The future, once clear, begins to feel uncertain in ways that are hard to explain. And that's where the emotional weight begins to grow, not all at once, but slowly through small realizations that begin to connect. And once they do, everything starts to feel different. As time moved forward, that quiet shift became harder to ignore. What had once been subtle was now more present, more real, more difficult to set aside. The connection with fans was still there, still strong, still meaningful, but continuing in the same way no longer felt certain. The stage, once a place of comfort, of expression, of energy, began to carry a different kind of pressure. Because now it wasn't just about performing. It was about managing something that couldn't be controlled in the same way, and that changes everything. It creates tension, not just internally, but in every part of life that surrounds it. For Katie, that tension didn't exist in public. It lived in the quiet moments, in the spaces between everything else, in the times when reality becomes clear without needing words. In the understanding that some things can't be fixed, only faced, that kind of moment requires a different kind of strength, a quiet strength, the kind that doesn't need to be seen to exist. The kind that carries everything forward without asking for recognition. And as that tension grew, so did the emotional weight of what was coming. Because somewhere beneath it all, there was an understanding that something would have to change. And when that realization settles in, it brings a difficult truth with it. Not everything can continue the way it once did. When the decision finally came, it didn't arrive with noise or drama. It didn't need to, it was clear. He stepped away from touring. For fans, it felt like the closing of something they had always believed would continue. The voice was still there, the music still existed, but the presence, the live connection, the shared moment was no longer the same. And that absence carried weight. But for Katie, that moment meant something even deeper, because it wasn't just about the end of performances. It was about accepting a new reality. A reality where priorities shift, where what matters becomes clearer but also more fragile at the same time. Goodbyes don't always come as a single moment. Sometimes they unfold slowly. Sometimes they happen in pieces, and sometimes they are felt long before they are fully understood. This was one of those moments, a quiet turning point. One that didn't just change what people could see, but changed everything behind it. In the time that followed, the story didn't end. It changed. There were still moments of connection, still music, still presence, but everything existed within a new understanding, a new rhythm shaped by adaptation and emotional resilience. For Katie, that meant navigating something deeply layered, supporting someone you love while also facing what that support truly means. Holding onto what remains while quietly accepting what has changed. It's not simple, it's not easy, it's emotional, sometimes overwhelming in ways that are hard to put into words. But within that, there are moments of strength that often go unseen, because not all goodbyes are about endings. Some are about transitions, about learning to live in a different way, about finding meaning in moments that no longer look the way they once did, and that's what makes this story so deeply powerful. It's not only about loss, it's about adaptation. About love that continues even when circumstances change. About standing beside someone even when the path ahead isn't clear. There is something deeply human about a story like this. Not because it is rare, but because it reflects something many people experience in their own way. The reality of change that cannot be controlled. The feeling of holding onto something while knowing it is shifting. The The quiet strength it takes to face that truth without turning away. For fans, it may feel like the end of an era. But for those living inside it, it is something far more personal, more immediate, more real. It's about presence, about being there in moments that matter most, about understanding that some things cannot stay the same no matter how much we wish they could. And within that understanding, there is a quiet kind of acceptance. Not easy, not immediate, but real. Because sometimes the most powerful stories are not about what is lost, but about how people choose to face what comes next. If this story made you pause even for a moment, don't ignore that feeling. Sit with it. Think about it not just as a story about someone else, but as something that reflects a deeper question. What does it really mean to let go of something the world values? Share your thoughts, your perspective, your understanding. And if stories like this, stories that go beneath the surface, matter to you, you can stay connected for more.